Money can buy almost anything except a get-out-of-jail-free card. Today we're exposing 10 wealthy American women who committed crimes that'll blow your mind. A socialite who trafficked underage girls for decades. A fake German heiress who scammed Manhattan's elite. A Silicon Valley CEO who fooled billionaires with technology that never existed. An heiress who funded a sex cult. A small-town official who stole over $50 million. And wait for this, an actual heiress who was kidnapped, then joined her captors as a bank-robbing terrorist. From murder to massive fraud, sex trafficking to embezzlement, these women had money, status, and privilege. They thought wealth would protect them. It didn't. Some are serving life. Others got shockingly light sentences. A few cases are still unfolding right now. Friends, family, investors, employees, all betrayed. Justice eventually caught up with every single one. Drop a comment, where are you watching from and what time is it? Let's start with a mother-son crime duo who murdered for Manhattan real estate. 1. Sante Kimes. Sante Kimes, a career con artist and grifter who had been running scams since the 1960 seconds. By the time she committed her most notorious crimes in the 1990 seconds, she was in her 50s and 60s, and she'd perfected the art of deception. Sante was married to Kenneth Kimes Sr., a wealthy millionaire who was much older than her. She used his money to fund a lavish lifestyle while running scams on the side. But here's where it gets really dark. She groomed her own son, Kenneth Kimes Jr., to become her partner in crime. Together, this mother-son duo would become one of the most infamous criminal teams in American history. Sante's early crimes were already horrifying. She faced slavery charges for keeping servants as literal slaves, committed arson for insurance fraud, stole identities, ran credit card scams, and forged documents. Her pattern was always the same: befriend wealthy people, gain their trust, and then rob them blind. The victim in this case was Irene Silverman, an 82-year-old wealthy widow who owned a multi-million-dollar townhouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Irene was a former Radio City Rockette who'd become a successful businesswoman, and she was sharp as a tack even in her 80s. In 1998, Kenneth Jr. rented an apartment in Irene's townhouse using the fake name Manny Guerin, with Sante posing as his assistant. From the very beginning, Irene was suspicious of them. She noticed their strange behavior, and then she found hidden cameras they'd planted throughout the property. She told her lawyer and friends that she feared these people and was planning to evict them. The plan Sante and Kenneth had was chilling. They wanted to steal Irene's entire townhouse by forging documents to transfer ownership. But to complete that theft, they needed to eliminate Irene. She disappeared before she could evict them. On July 5th, 1998, Sante and Kenneth Jr. murdered Irene Silverman in her Manhattan townhouse. The exact method of murder remains unclear because her body was never found. They wrapped her body in a bag and disposed of it somewhere that's still unknown to this day. Then, incredibly, they continued living in the townhouse and forged documents trying to take ownership of the property. The evidence against them was overwhelming, though. Investigators found notebooks detailing their entire plan, forged ownership documents, Irene's blood in the apartment, surveillance footage, and their belongings scattered throughout Irene's home. Their pattern of prior scams also came to light. This wasn't their first rodeo. They had a long history of scamming people across the country, and investigators linked them to other suspicious deaths, including the murder of businessman David Kasdan in 1998. Sante and Kenneth Jr. were arrested in July 1998, shortly after Irene's disappearance. Their trial took place in 2000, and despite the fact that Irene's body was never recovered, both were found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Sante received 120 years to life in prison, later receiving an additional sentence when she was convicted of murdering David Kasdan. Kenneth Jr. got 125 years to life. Sante died in prison in 2014 at age 79. Kenneth Jr. is still incarcerated today, serving his sentence with no possibility of parole. New York society was absolutely shocked that con artists had managed to infiltrate the Upper East Side so successfully, Irene's friends were devastated. They'd known she was in danger and had warned authorities, but it wasn't enough to save her. The public became fascinated with this mother-son crime team, and the case generated massive media coverage. Multiple books and documentaries have been made about the Kimes duo. The legal community found the case particularly notable because convictions for murder without a body are extremely rare. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered decades of crimes that Sante had committed, revealing just how prolific a criminal she'd been throughout her entire adult life. Sante Kimes murdered an elderly widow to steal her Manhattan townhouse. Our next wealthy woman also murdered for money, but she used a manipulated lover to pull the trigger for a massive inheritance. 2. Celeste Beard. Celeste Beard was a former waitress who worked her way up through a series of marriages, each one to a progressively wealthier man. By her 30s, she'd set her sights on the ultimate prize, Stephen Beard Jr., a self-made millionaire and retired TV executive who was 35 years her senior. She married Stephen in 1995 when she was 32 and he was 67. Once married, Celeste lived a life of lavish spending, country club memberships, luxury cars, designer, everything. But she had a secret. While married to Stephen, she was having a lesbian affair with a woman named Tracy Tarleton. When Stephen became suspicious of her excessive spending and started considering divorce, Celeste realized she might lose access to his millions. So she came up with a plan. She would manipulate her mentally unstable lover into doing something unthinkable, murdering her husband so she could inherit everything. Stephen Beard Jr. was 70 years old, a self-made millionaire who'd recently lost his wife when he met Celeste. He fell hard for her and married her in 1995, lavishing money on her and giving her everything she wanted. But Celeste's spending was out of control, and Stephen eventually became suspicious. By the time of the shooting, he was seriously considering divorce. If they divorced, Celeste wouldn't get the massive inheritance she'd been counting on. Enter Tracy Tarleton, a woman Celeste met at the country club. Tracy became romantically involved with Celeste and was mentally unstable, moving in and out of psychiatric care. Celeste saw an opportunity. She began manipulating Tracy, convincing her that Stephen was abusive and dangerous. She promised to leave Stephen and be with Tracy if only Stephen were out of the picture. She provided information about their home security system. Slowly, methodically, she convinced Tracy to kill her husband. On October 2nd, 1999, Tracy Tarleton broke into the Beard mansion in Austin, Texas while Stephen slept. She shot him in the stomach with a 20-gauge shotgun. Stephen initially survived the shooting, but months later, in January 2000, complications from infection killed him. After the shooting, Celeste played the role of grieving wife perfectly. She inherited millions of dollars and continued her lavish spending spree. But the relationship between Celeste and Tracy quickly deteriorated once Stephen was dead. Tracy realized she'd been manipulated and used. Eventually, consumed by guilt, Tracy confessed to authorities and implicated Celeste as the mastermind behind the murder. The investigation led to Celeste's arrest in March 2002. Her trial took place in 2003, and the evidence against her was damning. Tracy testified against her, detailing how Celeste had manipulated her into committing murder. Even Celeste's own daughters testified against their mother, describing her obsession with money and her plot to kill Stephen. Cell phone records, financial motive, and evidence of the affair all pointed to Celeste's guilt. The jury convicted her of capital murder and she was sentenced to life in prison. She's currently incarcerated in Texas and multiple appeals have been denied. Tracy Tarleton, by contrast, served her time and was released in 2011. The case became a massive scandal in Austin's wealthy community. The media dubbed Celeste the Black Widow, and ABC's 20/20 did multiple specials on the case. Several true crime books have been written about it. What shocked people most was that Celeste's own daughters testified against her, describing in chilling detail how their mother had orchestrated the entire murder for money. Public opinion showed little sympathy. This was cold-blooded murder, motivated purely by greed. The relationship between Celeste and her daughters remains destroyed to this day. Celeste Beard manipulated her lover into murder for an inheritance. But our next wealthy woman committed crimes on a massive international scale, sex trafficking that involves some of the world's most powerful people. 3. Ghislaine. Ghislaine Maxwell is a British socialite and the daughter of disgraced media tycoon Robert Maxwell, who died mysteriously in 1991 after stealing his employees' pension funds. Following her father's scandal and death, Ghislaine reinvented herself in New York society. She was educated at Oxford, connected to royalty, celebrities, and billionaires, and moved seamlessly through elite circles. In her 30s and 40s during the 1992s and 2000s, she became romantically involved with Jeffrey Epstein, a wealthy financier. But their relationship evolved into something far more sinister. Ghislaine became Epstein's procurer, recruiter, and enabler in what would become one of the largest sex trafficking operations in modern history. Ghislaine's victims were multiple underage girls, some as young as 14 years old. She would approach these girls and befriend them, presenting herself as a mentor or mother figure. She promised them education opportunities, career advancement, and financial help. Through careful grooming, she normalized the sexual abuse that would follow. Her role was critical to Epstein's operation. She recruited the girls, arranged their travel to Epstein's various properties, participated in some of the abuse herself, and managed Epstein's household staff to facilitate the trafficking. The abuse took place at multiple locations: Epstein's New York mansion, his Palm Beach estate, his New Mexico ranch, his private island in the Caribbean, and various properties in London. Between approximately 1994 and 2004, Ghislaine engaged in sex trafficking of minors, enticement of minors, and transportation of minors for illegal sexual purposes. The pattern was consistent. She would target vulnerable girls from disadvantaged backgrounds, approach them with offers of money and educational opportunities, groom them over time, facilitate their abuse by Epstein and others, and use wealth and powerful connections to intimidate anyone who tried to speak out. Those powerful connections included Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and many others in elite circles. Even after Epstein's conviction in 2008, Ghislaine continued associating with him and maintaining her luxurious lifestyle. When Epstein was arrested again in 2019 and subsequently died in jail, officially ruled a suicide, Ghislaine went into hiding. Authorities finally caught up with Ghislaine in July 2020 when she was found hiding in New Hampshire. Her trial took place in November and December 2021, and multiple victims testified, bravely sharing their stories of abuse. In December 2021, the jury found her guilty on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking and enticement of minors. In June 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. She's currently incarcerated at FCI Tallahassee, Florida, with a projected release date of 2037 when she'll be 75 years old. She's filed appeals, which are ongoing, but so far none have been successful. The victims were praised for their incredible courage in testifying and speaking out after years of being silenced. Elite circles were rocked by scandal as the case exposed connections between Epstein, Maxwell, and some of the world's most powerful men. Public anger focused on how wealth and privilege had enabled this abuse to continue for decades. The media coverage was massive and international. Conspiracy theories exploded around Epstein's death in custody, with many people questioning the official suicide ruling. Prince Andrew reached a civil settlement with one of his accusers and was stripped of his royal titles. The case raised serious questions about systemic failures. How were Epstein and Maxwell able to operate this trafficking ring for so long, with so many people apparently aware of what was happening? Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked children for decades using her elite connections. Our next wealthy woman scammed Silicon Valley with fake technology that never worked, and she did it by fooling some of the smartest investors in the world. 4. Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford and founded Theranos, a blood testing startup that she claimed would revolutionize healthcare. Between 2003 and 2016, during her 20s and 30s, she built the company to a peak valuation of $9 billion. On paper, her personal net worth reached $4.5 billion, making her the youngest self-made female billionaire. She cultivated a public image as the next Steve Jobs, complete with signature black turtlenecks and an unusually deep voice. Her board of directors read like a who's who of powerful men: Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Jim Mattis, and Rupert Murdoch. Everyone wanted to be part of what seemed like the future of medicine. There was just one problem: it was all a lie. The victims of Holmes's fraud fell into three categories. First, there were the investors who were defrauded of over $700 million. The Betsy DeVos family lost millions. Rupert Murdoch personally lost $125 million. Major companies like Walgreens and Safeway partnered with Theranos based on Holmes's lies. Second, there were the patients who received inaccurate blood test results from Theranos and made medical decisions based on false information. Some were misdiagnosed, and there were real health consequences. Third, there were the employees, particularly the whistleblowers who tried to expose the fraud. Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz, exposed the fraud despite enormous family pressure and was threatened with lawsuits by Holmes and her powerful legal team. Holmes claimed she'd developed revolutionary blood testing technology that could test for hundreds of conditions with just a single finger prick. The promise was incredible: fast, cheap, accurate blood testing that would democratize healthcare. The reality? The technology never worked. Between 2003 and 2016, Holmes faked demonstrations for investors, used commercially available machines for actual patient tests, manipulated test results to hide the failures, and repeatedly lied to investors, business partners, and regulators. The cover-up involved extreme secrecy at Theranos, threatening and suing whistleblowers, using powerful attorneys to intimidate anyone who questioned the technology, and convincing board members to ignore massive red flags. The fraud was finally exposed in October 2015 when Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou published his investigation. The company dissolved in 2018. Holmes was charged with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Her trial ran from August 2021 to January 2022, and she was found guilty on 4 counts. During the legal proceedings, she gave birth to 2 children, which delayed her sentencing. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. She began serving her sentence in May 2023 at FPC Bryan, Texas, with a projected release date of December 2032. Her business partner and former boyfriend, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, was also convicted and is serving 13 years. Silicon Valley was deeply embarrassed that so many brilliant investors and business leaders had been fooled so completely. Investors were furious about losing hundreds of millions of dollars. Patients expressed concern about medical decisions they'd made based on false test results. The media was fascinated, books were written, documentaries were made, and Hulu created a limited series called The Dropout, starring Amanda Seyfried. There was some feminist debate, with a few people arguing that Holmes was treated more harshly because she's a woman, but public opinion was largely unsympathetic given the massive scale of the fraud and the real harm to patients. Tyler Schultz, the whistleblower, was praised as a hero for exposing the fraud despite enormous personal and family pressure to stay quiet. Elizabeth Holmes scammed Silicon Valley billionaires with fake technology. But our next wealthy woman pulled off something even more audacious: the largest municipal fraud in United States history, stealing from a small town for over 2 decades. Cinque. Rita Crundwell. Rita Crundwell was the city comptroller of Dixon, Illinois, a small town with a population of about 15,000 people. For 30 years, she was a trusted public servant who managed the city's finances. She was in her 50s and 60s during the main period of her crimes, from 1990 to 2012. On the surface, she was a respected community member. Her passion was breeding and showing quarter horses, and she became one of the leading breeders in the nation. What nobody knew was that she was funding this lavish lifestyle by stealing millions of dollars from the small town that trusted her completely. The victim in this case was the entire city of Dixon, 15,000 residents who watched their town deteriorate while Rita lived like royalty. City services were cut due to what officials believed were budget shortfalls. Roads fell into disrepair, police and fire departments were understaffed, city employees were laid off. Meanwhile, Rita was traveling the country showing her championship horses. City officials trusted her completely for decades. The community never suspected that their comptroller was the reason their town was falling apart financially. For 22 years, from 1990 to 2012, Rita stole a staggering $53.7 million from Dixon. Her method was straightforward but effective. She created a secret city bank account, diverted tax revenue into that secret account, wrote checks to herself, falsified financial records, and manipulated audits to hide her theft. With that money, she bought over 400 quarter horses and became one of the nation's leading breeders. She purchased a $2.4 million luxury motorhome, a truck and trailer valued at $300,000, and jewelry, vehicles, and property across the country. She maintained a lavish lifestyle at horse shows nationwide while Dixon struggled. The scheme finally unraveled when City Clerk Cathay Swanson substituted for Rita while she was on vacation. Cather noticed a suspicious bank statement, investigated, found the secret account, and immediately reported it to the FBI. This was the largest municipal fraud in U.S. history perpetrated against a small town that could least afford it. Rita was arrested in April 2012 and pleaded guilty in November 2012 to wire fraud. She was sentenced to 19.5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $53.7 million in restitution. Her assets were seized, the horses were sold at auction, properties were sold, and vehicles and jewelry were liquidated. The city ultimately recovered approximately $9 million, a fraction of what was stolen. Here's what angered people most. Rita was released in August 2021 after serving only 8.5 years, less than half her sentence. She was released to a halfway house and then to home confinement. Dixon residents felt utterly betrayed and devastated. The city struggled financially for years trying to recover from the massive theft. Cathay Swanson, the city clerk who discovered the fraud, was praised as a hero. A documentary called All the Queen's Horses was released in 2017, detailing the fraud. National media attention focused on how shocking it was that a small town official could steal so much money for so long. The quarter horse community was scandalized, with many of her championship wins now tainted by the knowledge they were funded by stolen money. Public opinion was furious that she served less than half her sentence, feeling that she got away with destroying a small town and barely faced any real consequences. Rita Crundwell stole millions from a small town to fund her horse hobby. Our next wealthy woman was born into billions, and she used that family fortune to fund a dangerous sex cult for over a decade. 6. Clare Bronfman. Clare Bronfman is an heiress to the Seagram's liquor empire fortune. We're talking billions of dollars in family wealth. She had a privileged upbringing with the best education money could buy. In 2002, during her 30s, she joined an organization called NXIVM, which presented itself as an executive success program and self-help organization. She became completely devoted to the group's leader, Keith Raniere, and over the years, she's estimated to have spent over $100 million funding NXIVM's operations. What started as involvement in a self-help program turned into enabling and funding a dangerous cult. NXIVM's victims included women who were part of DOS, a secret society within NXIVM where women were branded like cattle and treated as slaves. There were also people who tried to leave the organization, whistleblowers who spoke out, critics of NXIVM, and former members. Clare's role was crucial to NXIVM's operations. She funded everything, financed aggressive lawsuits against critics to silence them, helped cover up crimes, intimidated victims and defectors, and even committed identity theft to monitor people NXIVM considered enemies. Between 2002 and 2018, Clare committed numerous crimes in service to NXIVM and Keith Raniere. NXIVM was marketed as an executive success program, but it was actually a cult. Within NXIVM was an even more sinister group called DOS, where women were branded with Raniere's initials and enslaved. Clare's specific crimes included conspiracy to conceal and harbor illegal aliens for labor, fraudulent use of identification, identity theft to monitor perceived enemies, funding the operations of a criminal enterprise, and bankrolling lawsuits to silence critics. The pattern was consistent. She used her massive wealth to protect Raniere at all costs, hired lawyers to harass anyone who tried to leave, paid for surveillance of people Raniere considered threats, manipulated the immigration system, and enabled a sex trafficking operation. Keith Raniere was arrested in March 2018, and Clare was arrested in July 2018. She was charged with racketeering conspiracy, identity theft, and immigration fraud. In April 2019, she pleaded guilty. Other major NXIVM figures were also convicted. Raniere got 120 years, actress Alison Mack got 3 years, and Nancy Saltzman got 3.5 years. Clare was sentenced in September 2020 to 81 months, that's 6.75 years in federal prison. Prosecutors had sought a longer sentence, and the judge specifically noted that Clare showed absolutely no remorse for her actions. She served her entire sentence without parole because of her lack of remorse and was released in September 2023. It remains unclear whether she still believes in Raniere and his teachings. NXIVM victims were angry that Clare received what they felt was a relatively lenient sentence given the harm she'd enabled. Wealthy families were embarrassed that a billionaire heiress had funded a sex cult. Clare's sister Sarah was also involved in NXIVM, and their parents became estranged from both daughters. Public opinion focused on how Clare's wealth had enabled decades of abuse. Multiple documentaries have been made about NXIVM, including The Vow and Seduced. The judge's statement about Clare's complete lack of remorse was chilling even after conviction. She still believed Raniere had done nothing wrong. What she thinks now, post-release, remains a mystery. Clare Bronfman used her family billions to fund a sex cult. Our next wealthy woman wasn't born rich at all. She created an entirely fake identity as a German heiress and scammed Manhattan's elite out of hundreds of thousands. 7. Anna Sorokin. Anna Sorokin's real background couldn't be further from wealth. She's the daughter of a Russian truck driver, but in her mid-20s, between 2013 and 2017, she reinvented herself as Anna Delvey, a German heiress with a $60 million trust fund. She moved to New York City and infiltrated Manhattan's elite through sheer confidence and charm. She convinced some of the wealthiest, most connected people in New York that she was one of them. The con was so successful that she nearly pulled off securing a $22 million loan to open an exclusive private arts club. Anna's victims fell into several categories. First, there were the luxury hotels she defrauded, places like 11 Howard, the Beekman Hotel, and the W, New York. She stayed at these high-end properties and then skipped out on over $100,000 in unpaid bills. Second, there were banks she almost scammed with fake documents while trying to secure that $22 million loan. Third, and most famously, there were her friends. Rachel DeLoach Williams, a Vanity Fair photo editor, fronted $62,000 for a Morocco trip when Anna's credit cards were declined. Anna promised to wire the money back immediately. She never did. Other friends regularly paid for expensive dinners and trips, always with the promise that Anna would pay them back. She rarely did. Between 2013 and 2017, Anna posed as a wealthy German heiress, claiming she had family money in Germany. She forged bank statements to back up her story, stayed in luxury hotels and then left without paying, used one person's money to pay back another in classic Ponzi-style fashion, wore designer clothes, chartered private jets that she never paid for, ate at expensive restaurants, tipped lavishly to maintain her wealthy image, attended exclusive art gallery openings, and joined elite social clubs. The Morocco trip was particularly brazen. She invited Rachel Williams and other friends to stay at a resort that cost $7,000 per night. When her credit cards were declined, Rachel had to put $62,000 on her own cards to cover the bill. Anna promised a wire transfer was coming. It never materialized. The con finally fell apart when banks started investigating her loan application and discovered the fraud. Anna was arrested in October 2017. Her trial took place in March and April 2019, and she was charged with attempted grand larceny, theft of services, and larceny. She was convicted on 4 counts of theft of services and 3 counts of grand larceny. Interestingly, she was acquitted of stealing from Rachel Williams due to a legal technicality. She was sentenced to 4 to 12 years in state prison and ordered to pay $199,000 in restitution. She was released in February 2021 for good behavior, but was immediately taken into custody by ICE for overstaying her visa. In October 2022, she was released to house arrest with an ankle monitor. Currently, she's fighting deportation and living in a New York City apartment. New York's elite were deeply embarrassed that they'd been fooled so completely by someone with no actual money or connections. Rachel Williams wrote a book about the experience called My Friend Anna. The media went into a frenzy. Netflix created a series called Inventing Anna in 2022, and HBO made a documentary. Ironically, Anna sold the rights to her story for $320,000, which she used to pay her restitution. Public fascination with her case is divided. Some people see her as a con artist who deserves punishment, while others view her as a clever hustler who exposed how shallow elite society can be. Anna herself has built a significant Instagram following and shows very little remorse, instead marketing herself as a brand. She continues fighting deportation, determined to stay in the United States. Anna Sorokin faked being a German heiress and scammed Manhattan. Our next woman was a real heiress from one of America's wealthiest families, and she became a bank-robbing terrorist after being kidnapped. 8. Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst is the granddaughter of newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, one of the most powerful and wealthy families in American history. She was just 19 years old and a college student at UC Berkeley when her life changed forever. On February 4th, 1974, she was kidnapped from her apartment by a radical leftist terrorist group called the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA. What happened next remains one of the most controversial and debated cases in American criminal history. Within months of her kidnapping, Patty, now calling herself Tanya, appeared in bank robbery footage armed with a rifle, apparently a willing participant in terrorist activities. The question that consumed the nation: was she brainwashed, or did she willingly join her captors? Patty herself was initially a victim. The SLA kidnapped her and held her for ransom, demanding that the Hearst family distribute $2 million worth of food to California's poor, which the family did. During her captivity, Patty claims she was held in a closet, tortured, and raped. This is where the Stockholm Syndrome debate comes in. She claims she was brainwashed and had no choice but to cooperate with her captors. Prosecutors later argued she joined the SLA willingly and became a true believer in their cause. The victims of the crime she committed included the customers and employees at Hibernia Bank, who were traumatized when armed terrorists, including Patty, robbed the bank on April 15, 1974. $10,000 was stolen, and people were held at gunpoint. After the kidnapping on February 4, 1974, Patty was held captive for weeks. Then, on April 15th, security cameras at Hibernia Bank captured shocking footage: Patty Hearst, armed with a carbine rifle, participating in a bank robbery with the SLA. She even made statements saying she joined the SLA voluntarily and denounced her family. On May 16th, surveillance caught her firing a weapon at Mel's Sporting Goods to help SLA members escape after shoplifting. She spent 19 months on the run as a fugitive. In May 1974, 6 SLA members died in a shootout with police, though Patty wasn't present for that. She continued as a fugitive until her arrest. Patty was arrested on September 18, 1975, in San Francisco. She was charged with bank robbery and use of a firearm in commission of a felony. Her defense centered on brainwashing, coercion, and Stockholm Syndrome, a relatively new concept at the time. The prosecution argued she joined the SLA willingly and become a true believer. The jury found her guilty on both counts in March 1976, and she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. However, she only served 22 months. In February 1979, President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence and she was released. Later, in January 2001, President Bill Clinton granted her a full presidential pardon. She went on to marry, have children, act in films, and write a memoir about her ordeal called Every Secret Thing. The public was deeply divided. Some people saw Patty as a victim of brainwashing who'd been tortured and coerced into participating in crimes. Others believed she willingly joined the terrorists and should face full punishment. The legal debate around her Stockholm Syndrome defense was groundbreaking and influenced how courts view coercion and psychological manipulation. The Hearst family supported her throughout the ordeal. Interestingly, SLA supporters saw her as a traitor to their cause when she later denounced them. Feminist perspectives on the case have varied wildly over the years. The media circus around her case dominated headlines for years, and she's been referenced in countless films, books, and songs. Her memoir detailed the horrific ordeal she says she endured. The modern view of her case is generally more sympathetic. She's largely seen as a victim who was kidnapped and traumatized into participating in crimes. Patty Hearst was kidnapped and became a criminal under extraordinary circumstances. Our next wealthy woman had no such excuse. She worked in a trusted position for the U.S. military and stole over $100 million from programs meant for military children. Janet Yamanaka Mello. Janet Yamanaka Mello was a civilian employee for the U.S. Army, working as a financial program manager at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. At 57 years old, she was arrested in December 2023 for one of the most brazen frauds committed against the military. For approximately 7 years, from 2016 to 2023, she held a trusted position with authority over military funding programs. She used that trust and access to steal over $100 million from programs designed to help military children and families. The primary victim was the U.S. military and, by extension, American taxpayers. But the indirect victims are even more heartbreaking: military children who should have benefited from programs like the 4-H Military Partnership Grant Program, youth sports programs for military children, and educational initiatives for military families. Legitimate organizations that should have received funding to help military families never got that money because Janet was stealing it. She literally stole from children whose parents were serving the country. Between 2016 and 2023, Janet created a fake company called Child Health and Youth Lifelong Development. She submitted fraudulent applications for grants meant for military family programs, then approved her own fake applications because she had the authority to do so. She transferred millions of dollars to her shell company and routed that money into her personal accounts. With that stolen money, she bought 31 real estate properties across Texas, New Mexico, Maryland, and other states. She purchased luxury cars, expensive jewelry, designer clothing and accessories, and maintained a lavish lifestyle that should have been impossible on her government salary. The most disturbing part? This continued for 7 years and involved over $100 million. The red flags should have been obvious, raising serious questions about oversight. The fraud was finally discovered when an internal audit revealed discrepancies. Investigators found the fake company and traced the funds directly to her personal accounts. Janet was arrested in December 2023 on federal fraud charges. She's accused of stealing approximately $108 million. As of 2024, her case is still ongoing. Authorities are seizing her properties and vehicles. She faces the potential of decades in federal prison if convicted. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Texas is prosecuting the case. The military community was absolutely outraged. This wasn't just stealing from the government, this was stealing from programs specifically designed to help children of service members. Public anger focused on how she betrayed the trust placed in her position of authority. Major questions arose about how this fraud continued for 7 full years without being caught. Media coverage expressed shock at both the audacity and the sheer amount stolen. Military families were furious that their children's programs had been robbed by someone who was supposed to be helping them. Prosecutors called it brazen fraud, and the case is being treated as one of the largest military frauds ever committed by a civilian employee. Janet Mello stole from military children's programs. Our final wealthy woman ran the biggest Ponzi scheme by a woman in San Diego history, a $400 million fraud that destroyed hundreds of lives. Gina Champion-Cain. Gina Champion-Cain was a prominent businesswoman and restaurateur in San Diego. At 54 years old, when she was arrested in 2019, she was well known and respected in the community. She owned multiple successful restaurants and real estate properties throughout San Diego. Her public image was that of a savvy entrepreneur and community leader, but behind that facade, she was running a massive Ponzi scheme through her investment company, ANI Development LLC. She pitched investments in liquor license loans, claiming restaurants needed financing to obtain liquor licenses. It sounded legitimate, secure, and low risk. It was actually a classic Ponzi scheme that would eventually defraud investors of $400 million. The victims were approximately 500 people who invested with Gina. Many were her friends, family members, and business associates, people who trusted her because of her reputation. Elderly investors who lost their retirement savings were particularly devastated. Some individuals lost millions of dollars. The trust factor was huge here. She was a prominent community member with visible, successful businesses. People trusted her business judgment and believed the investments were legitimate because she appeared so successful with her restaurants and properties. Between 2012 and 2019, Gina ran a $400 million Ponzi scheme. Her pitch was clever. She offered investments in liquor license loans, claiming that restaurants needed financing to obtain liquor licenses for their businesses. She promised high returns of 7 to 9% annually and presented these as low-risk, secured investments. The reality was devastating. Most of the liquor license loans she claimed to be funding didn't actually exist. She was using new investor money to pay returns to old investors, which is the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme. She also used the funds for personal expenses and to prop up her failing businesses. This maintained the appearance of success. Her multiple restaurants, real estate properties, and lavish personal spending all suggested a thriving business empire. The scheme finally collapsed in 2019 when she couldn't attract enough new investors to keep paying the old ones. The SEC launched an investigation and the whole house of cards came tumbling down. Many investors lost absolutely everything. The SEC filed charges in June 2019 and the Department of Justice filed criminal charges shortly after. In December 2020, Gina pleaded guilty to securities fraud and wire fraud. Her sentencing came in November 2021, 15 years in federal prison. She was ordered to pay over $300 million in restitution, though it's extremely unlikely investors will ever recover most of their money. Her restaurants and properties were seized and sold, but the losses were still enormous. She's currently incarcerated in federal prison with a projected release date in the mid-2030s. San Diego's business community was shocked. Gina had been well respected and seemed genuinely successful. The investors were devastated, with many losing their entire life savings. Elderly victims were particularly impacted, losing money they'd saved for decades and couldn't replace. Media coverage called it San Diego's biggest Ponzi scheme, and Gina was compared to Bernie Madoff. Her restaurants were seized and sold. Public opinion turned harshly against her for betraying the trust of her community. Victims spoke out in court, giving emotional testimony about how the fraud had financially ruined them and destroyed their futures. 10 wealthy women who had money, status, and every advantage, yet they all chose to commit shocking crimes. From Sante Kimes murdering for Manhattan real estate, to Celeste Beard manipulating a lover into murder for inheritance money, from Ghislaine Maxwell trafficking underage girls for decades to Elizabeth Holmes scamming Silicon Valley with fake technology. From Rita Crundwell stealing millions from a small town to Clare Bronfman funding a sex cult with her family billions. From Anna Sorokin faking being an heiress to Patty Hearst's controversial transformation from kidnapping victim to bank robber. From Janet Mello stealing from military children to Gina Champion-Cain running a $400 million Ponzi scheme. The sentences varied wildly. Patty Hearst received a presidential pardon. Anna Sorokin got just 4 years. Elizabeth Holmes is serving 11. Rita Crundwell got 19.5 but served less than 9. Ghislaine Maxwell got 20 years. Sante Kimes died in prison serving life. What connects them all? Betrayal of trust, greed, or twisted ideology? The belief that wealth would protect them. It didn't. Which case shocked you most? Should wealth influence sentencing? Does Patty Hearst deserve sympathy while the others don't? Where are you watching from? And what time is it? Drop your thoughts below, smash that like button, share and subscribe for more true crime content. Thanks for watching.